Hi, Andrew from Sax, and welcome to video number 9 in our 10 video sequence dealing with the issue of psychological health and psychological illness and how it relates to psych testing. This one will be all about personality, and we'll be looking at the question of how personality in the form of the hexaco or 6-factor model of personality relates to mental health and mental illness. The first thing that we should say is that the 6-factor model of personality is a broad bandwidth personality measure. So it's very well suited to workplaces, and it's very well suited to a range of really practical outcomes in a work life. And what I'll be showing you is that certain aspects of this broad bandwidth personality measure can indicate psychological health or psychological illness. But there are also some psychological illnesses which can't be measured by a broad bandwidth personality item like this. So, for instance, you've heard of a thing called manic depression. So the manic depressive person, if you psych test them in their manic phase and you psych test them in their depressive phase, you get very different scores. But because we tend to test people at one point of time, then you don't know that the person's score tomorrow might be quite different. Also, some other characteristics like schizophrenia, gets called a range of different things these days, but schizophrenia is something that can be very hard to pick up with a broad bandwidth personality assessment. So let's talk about some characteristics and what they indicate about mental health. And the first we'll talk about is integrity-modesty. So this is the degree to which a person is honest, truthful, and not arrogant. So integrity-modesty, or honesty-humility as it was called by Kibbe Lee and Mike Ashton when it was first discovered, is a predictor of the tendency to be dishonest or honest, to be manipulative or truthful, to be reliable, or to be the sort of person who may actually steal things. And in fact, this measure correlates with the probability of going to jail. People who score low in this characteristic tend to be more likely to be psychopathological or to be narcissistic or to be Machiavellian. So those characteristics are sometimes called the dark triad of personality. So things like psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism are indicated by low scores on honesty, humility, or integrity, modesty. So it's a good idea to hire people who are high on this characteristic. It also predicts effectiveness of relationships at work and in life generally. The second characteristic is emotionality. Emotionality does have a relationship to psychological stability and resilience. So when a person is low in emotionality, they tend to be more resilient. And look at some of the characteristics here. Anxiety. When a person is highly anxious, that can be a clinical issue. Threat sensitive. If a person is highly threat sensitive, that certainly can be an indication of a sense of vulnerability in trying to deal with the world. Lack of independence. So again, associated with issues like emotional instability or a lack of resilience. A lack of independence is really where you need guidance from everybody else, and being overly empathic is the characteristic of my emotions being so harmonized with other people's emotions that I can take their grief on. Let's talk about extroversion. People who are extroverted tend to be more socially confident, they tend to be more cheerful and optimistic, and those two characteristics, social confidence and cheerfulness and optimism, well, we know that both of those can be indicators of resilience. Now, I'm an introvert, and one of the things that I would never do is to give a complete unremitting herogram to extroverts and say, hire only extroverts. And that's wrong. I mean, there are jobs that introverts are better suited for than extroverts. But one of the things that we know is that extroverts do tend to be more resilient based on the fact that they tend to be, well, you know, the old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved. If you are socially active, and particularly if you're optimistic, then that will make you more resilient and better able to cope. Absence of anger. Well, anger is an indicator of psychological difficulties. And one of the things that we know is that a person who is very angry will tend to bully and harass often, and psychological illnesses can be associated with high levels of anger. So we'd be suggesting if a person's too low in absence of anger, then that may be an indicator of a risk factor that's worth taking very seriously. Conscientiousness. When people are highly conscientious, they tend to make decisions carefully, and that can be an indicator of the capacity to self-regulate. So when a person is low in this characteristic of makes decisions carefully, it may mean that they're more impulsive, but actually less self-regulating. Again, if they're angry and low in self-regulation, then that's a bad combination. Same as if you're emotionally unstable and lacking in self-regulation. It may mean that you will respond in an extreme way to your own emotions. But as well as that, we know that people who are highly conscientious do tend, in a more general sense, to be better at resilience. It's the characteristic of being able to persist and to endure rather than to give up, let's say, and to give in to whatever it is that you're feeling and perhaps do something that's ill-advised. And finally, openness to experience is the characteristic of being broad-minded and welcoming of new things. One of the things that we know is that if a person is too resistant to new things, that of itself can make them less resilient because they cope poorly when they have to do things a new way. So a person's personality is highly important to their psychological well-being, but bearing in mind there are many aspects of psychological well-being that are really not measured by broad bandwidth material like this. Like, for instance, if you look at one of the earlier videos where I talk in more detail about the P factor of psychopathology, one of the things that we know is that the capacity of the brain to communicate in amongst itself effectively, well, your average broad bandwidth personality assessment is not going to measure that. So one more video in this sequence, and this is about values and mental illness. Click on the link near this video to join me.